Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 135th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this month, the focus is recognition. So today, we're going to be talking about the right to have a family and the different ways to do this with Jenny Saft, founder of Oviavo. Jenny has a business background and completed her MBA at Hult International Business School in San Francisco. She was attracted to the startup world, where she stayed for 3 years before moving back to Germany. Prior to starting Oviavo, she worked as a VP Business Development for the Dutch fintech company Adyen, who gained an IPO in 2018. Jenny has personally undergone several social freezing cycles and has experienced the inadequacy of medical advice and support, the lack of transparency from clinics on treatment, cost, physical and psychological effects, the stigma in society, and the overwhelming amount of often very misleading information online. Oviavo is a fertility benefits platform that helps employers attract and retain top talent while tackling diversity and inclusion and the lack of it. By providing fertility benefits, Oviavo is helping modern companies overcome inequality. Not everyone is able to conceive a child naturally, and Oviavo wants to support everyone in their family forming journey regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, or marital status. So Jenny, a huge welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited.
We're so delighted to have you. And I just read out your bio and a little bit about your journey with Oviavo. But I'd really think it'd be useful for the listeners to know, what was the clincher? What made you start this business and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I started Oviavo together with my co-founder, Toby, end of 2019, pretty much based on my own egg freezing experience. I was 32 at the time. I had no partner and also didn't see myself with kids anytime soon. So for me, it was quite a logical or rational decision to freeze my eggs. I used to live in San Francisco for a while, and I think that's where the whole topic was for me a bit more normalized, because over there, people do it, it's super normal to freeze your eggs. So when I basically went to my gynecologist in Germany, I told her, look, I want to do this. How do we start? And then I got this look from her, and she said oh, yeah, egg freezing, maybe you should find a fertility clinic and discuss this there. And I was like, okay, wow. Only then I realized that I actually had no idea on how this works, what it costs, how long it takes and where to go. And it didn't stop there. Even when I finally found a clinic and I talked to the doctors, I was just really frustrated. I think doctors in Europe never really learned to have a proper sales conversation. You pay several thousands of euros or pounds, and I felt really alone and a little bit lost in there. And so I was really frustrated, and I started complaining a lot, mostly to my friends. And I have a lot of founder friends in Berlin as well. And at some point they said, Jenny, stop complaining, do something about it. And this is kind of how the idea was born. And of course, today we're not only focusing on egg freezing, but we are pretty much we're a fertility benefits provider that helps employees on the whole journey on becoming a parent. So that includes everything from egg freezing to sperm freezing to IVF, but also things like adoption or surrogacy. So everyone has the same chance to start a family.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And it's really interesting what you said, that you were 32, you weren't sure you wanted to have children, but you wanted to have the option. So that is interesting. And I think that's something that's really changed in the last 30 years. So what made you decide, right, I am going to egg freeze, even though I'm not sure if I do want children?
I think there's something about me, and you said it yourself right now, it's just having the option, having the door open in case I want it. I think I'm a little bit of a control freak, and what I don't like is kind of, I was just scared of that moment. And let's say in 5 years, I really, really want to have kids, and then suddenly it doesn't work anymore. And this was kind of scary to me, at least. And I think I like the idea, even though freezing your eggs doesn't give you 100% guarantee. It gives you a higher probability of a live birth, in that, so to say. But it still feels much better than not being prepared at all.
Yeah. And so what does, given what you've just outlined, what does true equality in this space, so the fertility, adoption, surrogacy space, look like for you? What's your vision?
I mean, equality, talking about equality, maybe we need to define what that means. It means that, like different people have different needs and different situations they're in. And like our idea is that no matter where you are in life, it's like no matter your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, your relationship status, or also your financial means, you should have the same chances to start a family, because it's like starting a family should be a right and not a privilege. And so that's why, same thing that I just mentioned, we want to give everyone the same opportunities and kind of like helping them with the treatments or services they need. And again, it can range from things like, okay, you're not ready yet in life to start a family, you want to keep your options open, then freeze your sperm or your eggs. You're trying, you want to get a child now, but it's been really hard. Like, we want to support you on your IVF journey, for example, or you are a same-sex couple, maybe a lesbian couple. You also, like, there are not so many options that you have. You probably have to go through an IVF treatment with a sperm donor. You're a same-sex couple that wants to go through surrogacy. And so this is like, I think there's a lot of like a broad range of things, and all these treatments, they might be like, they have a different level of like how invasive they are. There's different costs involved, but all of this shouldn't matter, because like everyone, again, should have the same chances to start a family.
Yeah, and you sort of told me about the fact that infertility is defined as the inability to conceive after 12 months of intercourse, and how you don't feel that that's actually, or potentially that needs to be looked at. So yeah, I'd really love to hear your thoughts about that. How should that be changed? How should this fertility or medical community look at infertility and redefine that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like you said it yourself, like 50% of the population struggle with infertility. And I think what also a lot of people are not aware of is that it's kind of like infertility is caused equally by men and women. I think a lot of like the population always thinks it's like it's a female problem, because I mean, we as women, we're a little bit disadvantaged, because like for us, like we're born with all the eggs we'll ever have. And so over time, like our egg cell reserve decreases, and so like the egg count goes down, also the quality goes down, so we're affected a bit earlier than men. On top of that, it's like, okay, we like people with an academic background are affected even more. There's a lot of studies that show, like, if you have a certain like bachelor degree, a master's degree, the probability that you start a family later in life is much higher. That also means that chances of you not getting any children is also much higher, for several reasons. There's not one reason at all, but that's just the case. And also, like, I mean, what we see now as well is that more and more same-sex couples also want to start a family. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But of course, there are a lot of regulatory limitations for them as well. And it depends a little bit on the country you live in. But there are countries out there where it's not even allowed for same-sex couples to go through an IVF treatment, for example. Same is true for like the financial support systems that are in place in a lot of countries. It's like mostly when you talk about like infertility treatments, our systems or like the public healthcare funds are not really set up to support this yet properly. I mean, a lot of things are changing. I mean, every month there's just like new updates. I'm not sure if you saw the updates about like France and Spain. And so now the public healthcare funds are actually covering a lot of the costs for these treatments. And they also adjusted their regulatory aspects around it. So also for same-sex couples, also for singles, which is amazing, I think. But this is like where you look at Europe and it's just like, how is it possible that there's still all these like very old school rules in place that do not support that modern world that we all want to live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning when you said about the difference between San Francisco and Germany, that was illuminating for me to hear, because I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have thought you could get pretty much the same level of understanding in Germany as you had in the US.
Yeah, definitely not the case. And it's also, I mean, it's just like simple examples. It's like, I mean, egg freezing is allowed in Germany, but then, for example, egg donation is not. So you can donate sperm, but you cannot donate egg. So it's like, who is coming up with this? And then at the same time in Austria, like egg freezing is not allowed, but then egg donation is. And so when you look at all the different regions, it's just like so crazy to see this, that like someone like 30 years ago came up with these rules, probably a white old man. And like since then, these rules were never touched again. And again, there is a lot of change. And I think it's amazing to see that, we're moving more closer and closer to that I like world that it should be, but there's still so much room for improvement.
And then thinking about workplaces and the work that Oviavo do, what should workplaces have in terms of support, not only for the journey to employees becoming parents in the way that they choose to, but also once they're parents as well? Because you mentioned people with there's lots of research, as you've said, people with higher educational levels tend to wait longer to have children. So by the time many of that people who identify as being part of that group have children, it might be a real shock to them. So I just wanted to get your sense on that, on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also something where, like, when you say like policies, it's something where we see that we can actually help a lot when like the companies a lot, because they struggle, right? I mean, most companies are fairly like comfortable in one country. Let's say they are in the UK, they understand like the rules in the UK, but as soon as a company is kind of active internationally, and there are like several countries, and then also there, like when you think about policies like parental leave policies and so on, they're so different in all the different regions, and it's very, very hard for a company to actually manage this. And for the longest time, companies have said, well, we just do whatever is kind of required in each and every country. But I think this is not enough anymore. And so the beautiful thing about like, when you take an active role as a company in benefits and this policy making, is that you can actually say, I don't agree with the status quo right now. I don't think the system is fair the way it is right now. It's not who we are as a company. And that's why we want to make rules based on our own value set. And so like the policies that you can talk about can range from like a very broad list of things. We're talking about parental leave policies, but we've also seen like more and more like modern companies take a stand on things like miscarriage leave, period leave, menopause leave. And so I think what we always say is like, we will help you to kind of, or we provide you like a benchmark or a list of things that you can do, that other companies are doing. It doesn't mean you as a company, you have to follow, you have to create a rule or policy on everything that's on it, but you have to kind of be aware that these options exist, and kind of always align it and match it with your own company culture, so to say. And I think it's a beautiful thing to say, like, I as a company, I don't agree that 2 weeks of parental leave is enough. I want to provide more and kind of like align it across all my countries that I'm active in, for example.
Yeah, and I think by having these conversations, exactly what you've said, it makes these things just much more okay to talk about. And of course, through time, we don't know how, and the world changes all the time, how these things become stigmatized and they're seen as very personal. Now, of course they are, but they're things around adjustments and conversations that need to be public so people can work and live how they want to. And I think, you've really summarized that so well. And I think adoption as well, people in the UK, it's very, very tough to adopt. And again, the support that people might need, because adopted children don't always have the easiest start in life. So it's thinking about all those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then what about mental ill health and fertility journeys? I know from friends and people, testimonies that I've read, Jenny, that it can be absolutely soul destroying. So there's so many barriers that impact mental well-being on people's fertility journey. So again, any thoughts on that and what you think workplaces should be doing, Oviavo's perspective on this?
This is also, I mean, we also always say, like, just implementing fertility benefits alone is not enough. You have to, like, when we launch with a new customer, we always set up, like, we have several communication workshops before, and we go through like all their, what are your communication channels internally? Like, what are the tools and the frameworks you're using to communicate something like this, and how not only once when you launch it, but like throughout the year, like what are the touch points you want to provide for your employees, because communication is so important. And we've seen this, like, because you need to make it tangible for people, so it becomes more normalized. And it can start with, like, one example I'm always telling people is that when we launched, like, with our first pilot customer a few months back, they basically announced the program. They had a lunch and learn session, and they talked about it's a medical company, so they talked about reproductive treatments in general, and they had like some facts, and then they had like someone of their own employees kind of explaining like what it felt like. She went through 3 rounds of IVF, and she showed pictures of her being bruised on her belly, bruises on her belly, and she said like how draining it was. And suddenly, like, all the employees that joined that lunch and learn session were like super, that they felt like how heavy it was. And after that, like, the CEO announced, like, because we want to support you in the future, we actually want to support you with this. That's why we're launching now fertility and family forming benefits with Oviavo. And it was like this super beautiful moment where all the employees were like, oh wow, yes. And now it's so like there's another example. We had a webinar last year with the former chief HRO of SAP, and we talked about, like, different benefits and kind of like how to deal in this like well-being, family-oriented environment. And at some point she said I think there were like a few hundred people listening in, and she said like, I've never told this anyone, but I had 2 miscarriages before I got my 2 kids. And suddenly there was a little bit of silence, but it created so much like empathy around this topic that suddenly more people started speaking up. And I think these are the examples you actually need to internalize as a company. It's like just implementing these benefits is not enough. You need to create like an environment where talking about these topics is okay, and people feel welcomed and heard as well.
And I think we see that so much, don't we? When people start talking about their journey and the challenges and the impact on their mental health, it does create that safe environment that I know you're really champion to talk about this and the challenges. And actually also maybe people have a more straightforward IVF journey, but then they might have postnatal depression or this child they've desperately wanted. Unfortunately, things take a turn for a worse for a while. And so again, that space, that non-judgmental space where people can say, actually, I'm finding this really, really hard, even though I desperately wanted this child or these children.
Yeah, totally. And again, I mean, I think it's like we need to start somewhere, right? You can't expect like companies to completely change overnight, but I think it's like starting with these small things and like make people really feel heard and kind of understood, create like these employee resource groups where people can exchange their experiences. And I think this is a wonderful start already.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about it with employee assistance programs, so making sure they're trained counsellors on board as well that are specifically know about fertility and infertility issues, I think is a big one, and the stress that parenthood brings. And you mentioned briefly earlier the regulations around egg freezing, IVF, adoption or surrogacy in Europe, and how they don't make sense. So you gave that example about Germany versus Austria. They're not really up to date. They don't reflect the requirements of our modern society and the way it's changing. So if I gave you a magic wand, Jenny, what would you like to see changed and updated? What would be your ideal?
I mean, my favorite example is always like when you look at all the different countries in the EMEA region, kind of. I think the country that's most advanced and kind of best set up, I think, is Israel. There's pretty much the government supports. So everyone has access to all treatments out there. Then it's kind of like it doesn't matter like what sexual orientation you have, what relation status you have, if you would want to do something preservative or you're kind of reactive, if you want to adopt or use a surrogate, everything is allowed. And the beauty in that system as well is that the government is pretty much paying for all treatments. I mean, the only exception is they don't pay for preservative treatments like egg freezing or sperm freezing. But like you can do as many, if you need like 10 IVF rounds, and even though you're already like, I don't know, 43, like the government's paying for it. And it just kind of creates this like really supportive environment. I mean, of course, it's Israel. There's also some cultural reasons behind it why they do this, but I think it's still kind of a role model for a lot of the European countries out there, because it's like also kind of an example in the UK. It's like, why is financial support for an IVF treatment linked to your zip code? Why does it make sense? This, and again, it's like it can bring so many examples in different regions in Europe. It's just like a lot of these things do not make sense. And I think everyone is aware. I think it will just take time. Probably it will take another 10 years or so to align around the minimum requirements that should be in place.
And, I'd really like to see more conversations around, while people are having treatments or waiting or deciding, more mental health support. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see people having conversations. I'd love to people to be talking about, parenthood. You may really want it, but there might be challenges. And I think for me in the UK, I just don't think there's enough on adoption. I don't think that I think, of course, we have to talk about safeguarding. It's essential, but I also think there must be ways to make the process more straightforward for people, because I know for myself, I have dabbled with adoption and thought about it a lot, and then had a friend who's a social worker who matched children with adoptive families, and she just said, right, well, these are all the things, and you really have to fasten your seatbelt because it is a tough ride. And I just thought, you know what, I can't go through that. But yeah, I would, that was really of interest to me. So yeah, there's always room, and I feel like this is a bit of an afterthought. It's not very proactive, it's reactive, and it depends on the economic status, what's going on, as opposed to a really careful planning perspective. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to like what you said about adoption, I think like one remark I always make is like something when we started this journey and kind of when we started our research, what we realized, because a lot of people said like, oh, like I don't think I believe in like egg freezing. It's like there's so many children out there that can be adopted. I'd rather go that route. And so when we started our research, we realized actually that's not really the case. I think in most European countries, the adoption rates are really low because there are not many children that go out for adoption. So there are more like foster children. I think this is kind of like that happens more and more. But there's actually like because there's contraception in place, we're relatively wealthy as a society, so it's not like in less developed countries that there's a lot of like adoption children available. Is such a bad word, but it's kind of like in the system, and so that's why there's a lot of parents that actually want to adopt, but there's not enough supply, and so to say. And so like what we see more and more as well is that kind of like this whole concept about foreign adoption is gaining much more importance. And then it comes back to like this ethical discussion. Do you actually want to get a child do you want to take a child away from that country where it comes from? Is this actually something you want to support or not? And so it's a very broad discussion, and something where we usually say like, okay, our job is like, we can't take the decision for you. All we can do is kind of provide you all the information you need so you can make your own informed decision.
I think that's it, isn't it? And you said that at the beginning that there's a lot of misleading information, and there've been two quite sort of high-profile celebrity. I don't want to say cases. I mean, they're kind of more presenters and celebrities, but talking about fertility journeys and how difficult it is to get the right information. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's not. It could be this, it couldn't be. And I think as someone who's never engaged with that process, it was very interesting for me to read, because my perception was there's tons and tons and tons of information about fertility. So again, even people who aren't in the system and the perceptions and the misunderstandings. So I think that just helps everyone if we have that very clear, accurate information.
Totally. And it's like I thought the same, right? I consider myself a highly educated woman. And when I started my journey, I was like, okay, how hard can it be? But the problem is that because it's so stigmatized and no one talks about it, it's like every person, no matter if you freeze your eggs or you go through an IVF round or adoption, you start from scratch. You do the same Google search request all by yourself over and over again. And so there's no learning really, because no one talks to each other. And so this is like exactly what we do as a company, really. We prepare like all of this. So you don't have to do it from scratch. We make sure like the data that you have, like the success rates and the costs and so on, it's kind of validated, and you have like this single source of truth where you can that you can always tap into. And then kind of same is true in that sense for, where do you actually go once you want to start a treatment? Like what clinic do you choose? Because it's the same thing. What most people do is like they just type in, they go to Google and say like, okay, fertility clinic London. And so like, and suddenly in London you have like 20 clinics. Where do you go? And what we see is that most people end up going to the clinic that pops up first, because that's maybe the one with the highest marketing budget, but not necessarily the best one for you, because maybe you have, endometriosis or PCOS, or you're over 40, or you had several miscarriages, or you're a same-sex couple. And also there, like different clinics have different specializations or experiences with different areas. And so also here we provide you with a really good overview and kind of guide you through, based on your individual criteria, kind of narrow down this long list of clinics and provide you with a curated list of clinic suggestions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. When you mentioned you might have had a history of endometriosis or polycystic ovaries, absolutely. I think those things are key. And it goes back to the fact that often there is not enough money invested in women's health, from gynecological cancers to fertility to the way that Parkinson's affects women differently because of periods and hormones. So yeah, I could talk about that for ages. So Jenny, as a super busy entrepreneur, and the work that you do, it is emotional. How do you look after your own mental health? Would you like to share your top 3 tips with us?
I don't want to say the hard way, but it's like what you learn is that you have to force yourself to look after yourself a little bit. I think there are always times where you forget to take time and just like breathe and enjoy life. But so like for this year, I really told myself that I want to spend more time doing the things I really love. And like one of the things I really, really love is surfing. I love the ocean, just being in nature in general. I told myself like to go surfing at least 3 times. And I've done this already once. I just told you, spend some time 2 weeks in the sun. And this is kind of like, I think for me right now, the number one goal. And of course, like always making sure like you spend enough time with your friends and also family. Also that sometimes I forget, but I think these are the 2 things I try to follow. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Really helpful there. So physical activity and spending time with friends and switching off from work. So great. If people want to find out more about you and your work, I will, of course, include the link in the show notes or the links. How should they do this? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I mean, really, if anyone wants to learn more about Oviavo and fertility and family forming benefits, the best way is just to reach out via email, via website, via LinkedIn, Instagram. Any channel works for us, and we love to kind of talk to people, to educate, spend time with people, and also listening to their stories. That's the best way.
Thank you so much. And that's oviavo.com. And don't forget to check out the show notes where all the links are there for the platforms and websites that Jenny mentioned. So Jenny, thank you so much for your time, your energy, this discussion. I know when we had our pre-conversation and we had a really lively conversation then, so this has been brilliant. And I know it will be such value to so many people. So really appreciate your time and all the work that you do.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure, everyone. And we will see you in the next episode. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this, please do leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast and can leave reviews. And until the next episode, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.